When you hear the word hospice chaplain, what comes to mind? I want you to be honest. Do you picture a mysterious figure in a dark robe, scythe in hand, ready to escort someone inside of the afterlife? Or maybe you assume that when I walk into a room that I'm there to give one final altar call, urging someone to get right with God before their last breath. Well, let me tell you, the reality is far from either of those. See, hospice chaplains, we're not grim reapers, and we don't have a one size fits all script for salvation. In fact, what I do for the most part is much more personal, much more compassionate, and to be quite frank, a lot more practical. So, what does happen when a hospice chaplain visits a patient? How do we support not just the person in hospice, but also their family? Stick with me because by the end of this episode, you'll have a completely different understanding of what this sacred role is really about. And trust me, you may never look at end of life care the same way again. Let's dig in. Let's tackle the biggest misconception first. The idea that hospice chaplains are some kind of hairbangers of death. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a patient's room and they or their family give me that look like, oh no, it's time. Let me set the record straight. My presence does not mean death is imminent. Hospice care isn't about death. No, it's about quality of life, however much of it remains. I've sat with patients for months, helping them process their emotions, sharing their life stories, and even laughing at old memories. Some families have even told me, wow, I expected this to feel a little heavier, but it's not all doom and gloom. Sometimes it's about helping someone find peace, not just in their faith, but in their relationships, their regrets, or even their unfinished business. And here's the truth. Hospice chaplains are just as focused on the living as we are the dying. We are there to make the present moment as meaningful as possible. Now let's tackle the second myth that hospice chaplains are only there for religious support. If you're picturing me standing at someone's bedside reading scripture all day, let me stop you right there. Yes, for those who want faith-based guidance, I do offer it. But my role is just as much about emotional and psychological support as it is about spirituality. I help patients wrestle with their fears, fear of pain, fear of the unknown, and even fear of not being ready to go. I help families navigate their own grief while their loved one is still here. And sometimes my job is simply to be present, to listen, to hold space. Here's something a lot of people don't realize. You don't have to be religious to receive support from a hospice chaplain. I've had deep, profound conversations with people of all beliefs, including those who don't believe in an afterlife at all. And let me tell you, some of the most sacred moments I've ever witnessed had nothing to do with scripture or prayer. Sometimes peace comes in the form of a long overdue conversation with a son or a daughter. Sometimes healing is in sharing one last joke, one last memory, or one last I love you. That's chaplaincy. It's not about converting people. It's about meeting people where they are. Which brings me to my final myth, that hospice chaplains always want to save you before you die. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a person of deep faith, but I don't walk into a patient's room assuming that my beliefs are their beliefs. Hospice chaplains are trained to be ecumenical, which means that we honor and respect all spiritual backgrounds. Whether a patient is Christian, Jewish, Muslim, atheist, or simply unsure, my job is to help them find meaning in their own way. I once sat with a patient who told me, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in love. So we spent our time together talking about the love he'd given and received inside of his life. That was his version of peace. That was his final blessing. Now, for those who do want prayer, scripture, or even a bedside hymn, I offer it freely. But I always ask first, what do you need from me today? Because at the end of the day, chaplaincy isn't about my agenda. No, it's about their journey. So let's recap. No, hospice chaplains are not the Grim Reaper. Our presence means support, not countdown. No, we're not just religious guides. We provide emotional and psychological care for both patients and families. And no, we're not here to push salvation. We meet people where they are, however they find peace. If there's one thing I want you to take away from today's episode is this: hospice chaplains are here to help people live well, even as they prepare for the end. So if you ever find yourself or a loved one on hospice care, don't be afraid to say yes when a chaplain visits. You might be surprised at the comfort, laughter, and life that comes from the conversation. If you found this episode helpful, insightful, or even just thought-provoking, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. And if you have questions about hospice, grief, or the spiritual side of loss, send them my way. You might just hear your question answered inside of a future episode. Until next time, take care, and remember, life is still worth living, even in its final chapters.